Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. Today I'm going to talk about why, in some instances, Photoshop's depth blur is superior to Luminar AI's Portrait Bokeh AI. And along the way, I'm going to give you detailed instructions on how to use Photoshop's depth blur. Okay, the reason why in some instances Photoshop's depth blur is superior to Portrait Bokeh AI is rather obvious. Portrait Bokeh AI only works on people. So if you have a subject that isn't a person, like a little statue or maybe a dog or a cat, it will not work. You could see that the Portrait Bokeh AI tool that is in Luminar AI is grayed out on this image, whereas the depth tool will work perfectly fine on this type of image. So what I want to do is give you detailed instructions on how to use the depth blur in Photoshop, because like many things Photoshop, it's not entirely intuitive and it's a little bit weird sometimes. Whereas, Portrait Bokeh AI is pretty straightforward. When you do have a person in the shot, the sliders are very responsive. It's pretty obvious what they're doing. Portrait Bokeh AI in that instance, as far as speed and ease of use, has Photoshop beat. But Photoshop works on an image like this, but it's kind of slow. It has to access the cloud. So if you don't have, internet hookup while you're using Photoshop, the depth blur tool doesn't work. So that's kind of stupid, if you ask me. But anyway, let's demonstrate how to use it. What we're going to do is obviously do this image. We're going to go up to filter, and it's under the neural filters. All right, it's one of the neural filters. And if we open that, you can see there's a number. We want depth blur, and we'll turn it on. And right here, you can see this spinning blue circle. That means it's accessing the cloud and it's downloading some information from Adobe to make the depth blur tool work. And you can see when it kicked in, it did a lousy job. It doesn't really know the focal point. You can see it blurred out the face of the statue. Now there's two different ways you could fix that. The first way is you could just click right on the little preview image in here of where you want it to assume the focal point is. That would be, in this case, on the statue's eyes. So I'll click right there. Again, it's got to access the cloud, and this is where it's really slow, right? It did a great job, though, now. It has the statue in focus. The background is out of focus. Now, there's another way you could do this. You could see when I did that, it grayed out focal distance. It won't let me do it. And it said if I want to use it, I have to remove the focal point. So I'll remove the focal point. And then, once it's done accessing the cloud, what I could come down is move this focal distance slider. If I move it to the left, it'll move the focal distance closer to the camera. And you can see then it has our little statue in focus and the background out of focus. Now we have blur strength. That's pretty obvious. These sliders actually are pretty obvious. So if I move it to the right, it gives you more blur on the background. To the left would be less blur. Now I'm not going to move all these sliders because, again, it has to access the cloud every single time and it will really slow things down. But keep in mind, these sliders do exactly what they say. Add haze, temp, saturation, brightness. But it only does it to the background. So if you want to change the color temp of the image, it's only going to work on the background. And one note, haze is really weird. Haze to me is usually kind of a lighter tint. If I move that to the right and let it render, you can see it's going to take forever. But you see how it's kind of a weird, kind of dark gray? I don't like that. But I'll turn that off, get rid of it. Again, it has to access the cloud. But these only work on the background, all these sliders, all right? Now, there's something here called depth map, and up here there's depth map resolution. I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but right now you kind of get an idea what you could do here, and it works on objects, so that's great. So we're going to click OK, and when it comes back, you'll see the entire image is selected, these marching ants going around the entire thing. If you want to get rid of those, hit Command or Control D to deselect those. Now what you'll have is two layers. You have your original background layer, and then you have this layer 1, which is the depth blur layer. And if I turn off the background layer and we look at it, you can see it's an odd looking layer, isn't it? So it's not a real pixel layer, and it's not really a mask either. It's the depth blur. All right, so might be hard for you then to need to do something else to it if you wanted to add another filter to this. What you would have to do is either merge these by flattening them or put a stamp layer on top by hitting on a Mac Shift Option Command E, or on a PC Shift Alt Control E. And when you do that, you'll get a stamp layer up here, and then you could put other filters on it. So that's definitely something you'll want to be aware of. Now let's go to another image. I want to talk about this depth map and stuff like that, and some other problems you may encounter. This, I don't know, what is that? A gargoyle or something, right? And the background I would like to be more in blur. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Filter, Neural Filters. And again, we'll get that same dialog box. We'll click on Depth Blur and turn it on. Again, it has to access the cloud. Okay, let it do its thing. And okay, so it blurred out the background. But look at the shoulder of the gargoyle and the shoulder or the back over here. See how that's blurred? There's no masking here. So there's not a mask available where I could paint in areas to have it blur some areas and remove blur from other areas. So that's not available. This is easy enough to fix, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And there's another issue too. See this little section right here? It didn't blur this part that is being, I guess, between the ears and the horn of the gargoyle. That isn't blurred. It's not matching the background blur. So we need to fix that as well. So before I get into the depth map resolution and the depth map only here, let's fix these issues. So what we need to do is click OK. And then again, we're going to get that weird layer here that really isn't a pixel layer and really isn't a layer mask. It's the blur layer. So what we need to do is get rid of these marching ants, hit Command or Control D again. And then really, as far as getting rid of the blur that is on the shoulder and the back, all you need to do is add a mask to this, because below it we have the unblurred background layer. So what we need to do is just add a mask. Make sure you're clicked on layer 1 and add the mask. Oops, I want to hit the wrong key. Not that. You want a layer mask, not a new layer. So we have that. All right, so we have the layer. Make sure you're clicked on it. Get a brush. Hit the B key on your keyboard. You need to paint in black on the mask. You can see right now I have white and black here. Hit the X key to swap them. If you don't have white and black there, hit the D key on your keyboard to get the default colors of white and black, and then hit the X key until black is the foreground color. We're going to get a larger brush by hitting the right bracket key, and we're just going to paint right on that mask and get rid of the blur that is on the background, or on the back and on the shoulder of the gargoyle. Okay, now we have this other problem here. Let me get this right here. You can see that's not blurred properly. So what we need to do is click on the background layer. We need to get a selection of this tiny little area here. So hit the W key on your keyboard to get a selection tool. And then you're going to get one of these three: Object, Quick, or Magic. Make sure you're using the Quick selection tool. And then use the bracket keys to resize your brush. Left bracket key smaller, right bracket key larger, and just select that area right in there. Okay, now we have that selection. Now we need to duplicate just that little area by hitting Command or Control J. So that is what is here. If I turn this off, that off, you can see that we just have that right there. Then what we need to do is just drag that to the top. We can turn everything else on. Okay, now we need to blur just that little bitty part right there. To do that, make sure that layer's on the top, hold the Command or Control key in and click on it. Now you got your selection back. Then go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can see it's coming on at 10.1 right at the moment, and it blurred it pretty good. Maybe you could bring it down. You can see how it's only blurring that little thing right there. So maybe around 9.3. Click OK. Now get rid of your selection by hitting Command or Control D, and there, we just fixed that issue as well. Now I want to talk about these depth maps and why they're there and how you might want to use them. So we're going to get rid of all that and get right back where we started. Now we're going to go up to Filter, and we're going to go to Neural Filters. Again, we're going to go to our Depth Blur and turn that on. Let it do its thing. And once it kicks in, all right, eventually. Okay, there it kicked in. Well, let's look at this depth map resolution. But before I do that, I'm going to turn on Output Depth Map Only. When I turn that on, you can see we get this kind of grayscale image. What that means is where it's black is in focus, where it's white is maximum out of focus, and the varying shades of gray in between vary between what is in focus and out of focus. So that's the depth map. Now you notice the depth map resolution is high, and what that means is we're getting these really defined edges. If I go to low, you'll see that it's kind of all more blurred out. And if I turn off the depth map only, you'll notice then that some of our gargoyle is blurred out as well. So it's not as defined. It's not hitting the edges as precisely. It's kind of blurring out around the edges. So if you ever have, or if you ever apply a depth map to an object and the edges just look too hard, or you want part of the object, the edges of the object to be a little bit blurred, then you're going to change the depth map resolution. You could try low, medium. You can see that less of it once it kicks in. Again, that's the bad thing about this. It has to access the cloud, and sometimes it takes a very, very long time. So really have a big mug of coffee or soft drink or adult beverage with you when you're doing this. And this one is taking an exceptionally long time, and so I might not even wait for it because we're trying to do a video here. So we'll go to high and see if that kicks in, because that was active a second ago. There it is. Okay. So you have to believe me that medium would be between low and high. All right. Now, that's that. So that's why you might want to use that when you want to blur out the edges of the object. But what's this depth map only? Well, you could output this to a depth map and then use that depth map to apply blur to an image. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to apply it to the, output it to a depth map, and you click OK, and you can see we have a depth map now up there. Well, what good is it? Well, also we have these marching ants. Why do we have those marching ants? Well, that's encouraging you to select this, or copy it to the clipboard, I should say. So to copy it to the clipboard, hit Command C. So it's copied to the clipboard. Now what we need to do is go to Channels. All right, we have all these channels. This is the standard channels you'd get on any layer in Photoshop, all right? Any layer. So we're going to go down and click this little plus sign to add a new channel. And when we do that, you can see it's called Alpha 1. This is an alpha channel. Now what we need to do is paste the clipboard onto here. Now the typical paste command is Command or Control V as in Victor. Don't do that because it will try to center it and it won't be where you actually need it. So what you need to do is hold in the Shift key, hold the Command or Control key in with the Shift key, and then hit V. So Shift Command V, Shift Control V, and we just pasted it. You get rid of the selection now by hitting Command or Control D, so you get rid of those marching ants. So we now have this alpha channel. All right. Now, go to the background layer, duplicate it by hitting Command J. It's duplicated. We're going to drag it to the top. All right, so we have our background copy. This is going to be our blur layer now. And we have this layer down here. We don't even need that active. You don't even need that active at all. You still need it, but you need it. You could stay right there is what I'm trying to say. All right, now go up to Filter, down to Blur, and then over to Lens Blur. And you can see when we activate Lens Blur, look, automatically for the depth map, it found that alpha channel. You can see if we go in the drop down, typically, if you didn't have an alpha channel, it would be on none. And when it's on none, it blurs out everything. But because we created that alpha channel, it will show up there. And that alpha channel will blur out the background. And you can see it did a better job than the actual depth blur tool. It didn't affect the gargoyle shoulder or back at all. But it actually is funky around the chin here. You can see it didn't blur out where it should have blurred out there. It did blur out between the ear and the horn of the gargoyle, so that is good. You could affect adjustments here, the typical adjustments that you would have in the lens blur tool, specular highlights, so on. You could add noise. So you could do things here that you couldn't necessarily do with the depth blur. But we need to fix this issue down here. Again, there isn't really a mask here allowing us to paint in blur or to paint out blur. So what we're going to have to do is click OK. Okay, so we have this background copy, and you can see it did all right. What we could do now is we could get rid of this layer. Totally, that is our depth layer. Get rid of that. All right, so we're up here in this one. You can see there's before and there's after, but we have this funky issue right in here. So what we're going to do is blur that. And how we're going to do that is we're going to first make this a smart object. To make it a smart object, right-click on it and go down, Convert to Smart Object. And once it does, you'll see I have a little kind of square in the corner there. Now I'll go up to Filter, down to Blur, and then down to Gaussian Blur. All right, let it do a blur amount. It's going to blur the entire image, all right? Just let it do it. It's not a big deal. Just, you know, you could turn it up if you want, whatever. Just let it blur it. Don't worry about that number. Click OK. Okay, now when you created a smart object, it's now really a smart filter, and we have a mask. Now what we need to do is invert this mask. It happens to be white. We need to make it black. So hit Command or Control I on your PC or computer, and now it's black. Make sure you're clicked on it still. All right, and we're going to get a brush. We're going to paint on the mask, and we're going to paint in that blur where it's missing. So we're going to get a brush by hitting the B key, and because it's a black mask, what do we have to paint in? We need to paint in white. So we need to flip-flop these by hitting the X key, and then we're going to get a smaller brush by hitting the left bracket key, and then we'll come in here and we'll try to add that bit of blur to where it was missing, and maybe in here too. And that's it. That's how you kind of clean that up. So hopefully that gives you enough knowledge on how to effectively use depth blur in Photoshop, because many times we want to blur out the background of something that isn't a person. Luminar AI's Portrait Bokeh AI works great for that, but in this case it wouldn't work on a gargoyle, so this works. This is the way to go, and hopefully that helps you better utilize Photoshop in your workflow. Thank you everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.